Or maybe pass it.
Welcome everyone to the Eugene City Council work session. Welcome to everybody here and to those at home. And our first item up today is we're welcoming back the Human Rights Commission, part 2. And I'm going to turn this right over to them. They're going to talk to us about their work plan today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Raquel Wells, Equity and Human Rights Manager, and we are going to talk about the HRC's work plan. I'm going to turn it over to our council liaison, Councilor Farr, to kick us off, and then our chairs will get started.
He's going to kick us?
I'd once again like to thank the Mayor for granting my request to be appointed to the Human Rights Commission. This is a really momentous period of time for the Human Rights Commission as they transition from more or less their old, perhaps more reactionary mode into a more proactive mode that we're going to be hearing about this afternoon. We have a new chair and co-chair who will be making the bulk of the presentation. That's Tony, and I'd like to welcome other Human Rights Commission members who are in the audience. We have Andrew and Andrew. So with that, I'll turn it back to Raquel.
All right. So my name's Tony. I'm the current chair of the Human Rights Commission, and this is Ken, my vice chair. And did everybody get our work plan, our draft work plan? Okay. So basically, we wanted to make sure and let everyone know most, if not all of this work plan actually came a lot from our listening sessions that we kind of went over before with you guys. So we really listened to what the community wanted from us, as well as what we've heard from different council members of what you guys would like us to do and to create this work plan. So it's a little bit different than normal work plans and how we've captured it from what we looked in the past of work plans. Anything else to add with that?
Can you just describe the procedure that we used to come up with it, the facilitated discussion?
Sure, yeah. So we had a number of listening sessions that we went out into the public and captured all their feedback. And then we, this great picture on the cover here, we hashed out all the main topics after the think tank, separated them out, and really focused on what was commission work versus what was ordinance work versus what was the city staff work. And so, and then from there we kind of had a facilitator help us work through all the different aspects and feedbacks and come up with common grounds for all of that. So,
okay, so I think we're going to proceed goal by goal briefly through for the work plan to leave you enough time for comments and questions. And I'll do goal number 1, and Tony will do goals 2 and 3, and then we'll both share answering any questions that you would have. But goal number 1, engage in education, outreach, and collaborations, fostering respect for social equity, civil and human rights in the community. And what this goal does is it basically continues, but also expands a bit on the functions that have been performed by the Human Rights Commission's Education and Outreach Committee, one of the standing committees which we've suggested be repealed in a revision of the Human Rights Ordinance. And this particular goal 1 and its objectives reflect, again, the desires that we heard from people in the community during our listening project. In this case, that the HRC continue to hold informative and collaborative community events on human rights concerns, local human rights concerns, that we provide speakers to the community about the Human Rights Commission and its activities, because a lot of people, surprisingly, still don't really know much about us, and also that we lend Human Rights Commission support to the human rights work that's being done by other community groups, because we're not the only ones who are doing this type of work in Eugene. And goal 1 will be implemented by the Human Rights Commission as a whole. All the Human Rights Commission members want to contribute to working on Goal 1 and on its objectives. And they see Goal 1 as providing them with a wide range of opportunities to make use of their individual interests, their skill sets, and their experiences. So the remaining time I have, which is about 2 minutes, I think I'll just go really quickly through Goal 1. The International Human Rights Day is one of the objectives, and I want to make sure to invite all of you to this year's International Human Rights Day celebration, which will be held on December 6th in the evening from 6 to 8 p.m. with refreshments just before that at 5:30. And we have a really great program set up for that. Second objective, 1.2, is to hold human rights events in collaboration with other groups such as the Community Coalition. And we have invited a nationally known, actually internationally known, speaker to come in April, and he's agreed to come for 2 or 3 days. His name is Eric Tars. He's an attorney with the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty.
His last name again?
Tars, T-A-R-S, Eric Tars, National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. And he's agreed to come and talk with us about the human rights lens and how it can be applied to homelessness, and also share with us some of the things he's seeing happening around the country that might be helpful and useful to us in addressing homelessness in Eugene.
When's that going to be?
In April, the second half of April. 1.3, provide human rights education and workshops. Some of this is continuing, but some of it's new. We decided that we wanted to create a speakers bureau so that we can organize requests for people to come out to the community. And we also want to hold a human rights framework workshop for local social justice groups to help them understand what they're doing is really human rights work, and they may not always be framing it that way, and they may choose not to, but they can at least begin to see how their work fits with what we're doing. And then 1.3, respond to requests for Human Rights Commission event sponsorships and financial assistance from community groups, present awards. Some of this is, again, continuing work that we already do, but the first task, success current community event support system, we've never really sat back and looked at what we are doing with regard to responding to community requests for funding, and whether we're spreading this out or we're acting fairly and justly in terms of who's being supported. So we want to take a look at that. Human Rights Day, Staff Award, MLK Awards, those are things we are continuing to do. And then the other new thing which we've added in here is to explore creating an award for youth efforts to learn and participate in events on human rights learning. There's already some of that going on in the schools, and this offers a wonderful opportunity to partner with the 4J system and Bethel and so forth around things that young people are really interested in. So that's my summary of where we're going with Goal 1.
Goal 2, our liaison goal, maintain strategic HRC liaisons and engage in cooperative endeavors with the community and with the City of Eugene advisory groups that support human rights and social equity. And the primary thing that we're trying to do with this one is use our liaisons to our advantage, have them work with the triple bottom line on social equity, and really trying to get the social equity aspect in there. And so goal 2.1, advise, so this is primarily where we're wanting to work with you guys and find out, what you guys would like from us and how you guys would like us to work with those. As liaisons, primarily that would be the chair and co-chair in respect of that, and as well as with our council liaison. Increase the effectiveness of Human Rights Commission liaison relationships. That's, again, where we're trying to use the triple bottom line on, like, the Police Commission and CDBG, not that, City Block Grant Commission, all the different boards and commissions that we're on. Work with Equity and Human Rights Board. We have 2 chairs on the board that we work within the city to help advise both the internal city on social equity as well as outside. And then work with the Police Commission. On this one, our Police Commission liaison is really working on the hate crimes conference that the Police Commission is working on to try and be a liaison there. And then work with the Sustainability Commission, neighborhood associations, support the creation of the Eugene's Disability Advisory Committee, since there's not going to be, well, assuming there's not going to be the accessibility committee as part of our group, this is what we're working on to take that place. Work with the police auditor's office and civilian review boards, and then work with the Equity and Human Rights Center on the Ombudsman program that addresses the community members' human rights concerns. So these are the emerging ones that come into the center, so we can work with that. So that's goal 2. And then moving right to goal 3, this one I'm particularly excited about. Goal 3 is effectively address selected human rights and social equity issues of concern to the community and city. Respond to advocate on community issues around homelessness is a big one. This is where we're going to get into our work groups. So we're looking at having, I think it's 5 work groups, that we can really effectively just respond to each of these tasks that we've heard from our community members as issues that they would like us to address. So homelessness, of course, is always at the top of every list we've ever taken from the community, as well as listening to you guys. So respond to and advocate to youth issues in our community is another group. Respond and advocate to the removal of impediments to immigrant integration within the Eugene community, and respond to and address the issues of systematic and individual racism, and respond to and address hate and bias activities within the Eugene community. So those are the 5 groups, and that we're really going to be able to come back and say, look what we accomplished over the last year, 2 years. So do you guys want to add anything on your side?
Yeah, Christy. Got it.
Hi, I'm Christy Hammett, Central Services Director, and Tony mentioned in reference Equity and Human Rights Board. I'm the executive team liaison to that group, and really appreciate the opportunity to get to work with both Ken and Tony on a fairly regular basis, and I really compliment the work that's being done by the Human Rights Commission, and really enjoy having the opportunity to have them participating on the board. A couple of things I thought I'd mention is really just to draw the link between the Diversity and Equity Human Rights, or strategic plan, the DESP, sorry, and the work that's being done by HRC. The Diversity, Equity, and Strategic Plan was adopted in 2009, and it's marked an exciting milestone in our ongoing work to meet diversity and human rights goals and the needs of the city organization and the greater community. This plan, initiated by City Council, by the City Council Committee on Race, was the product of hard work by many inside and outside the organization, including many community members. The plan guides city efforts to meet the needs of a diverse and changing organization and community. I'm very excited about the ongoing progress, and also want to call out some areas in which the DESP connects with the HRC work plan. So one of the DESP goals is the communication and engagement, and it's to communicate openly and respectfully with the community. The specific DESP action item is to create a plan to integrate the human rights city concepts into city policies and procedures. The HRC work plan includes collaborating with liaisons to the city organization and to the community organization, as well as closely with the Police Commission, Sustainability Commission, Neighborhood Association, and the police auditor. The second item in the DESP is to complete and put into action the Hate Incident Response Plan, which you all are familiar with, and to respond to complaints about discrimination and bias. And the HRC work plan includes working with the Equity and Human Rights Center on the Ombudsman program to better address community members' human rights concerns. And so there's a great link and good work happening there. And then the third point that I wanted to share was the DESP action item to ensure improvements by factoring diversity and human rights issues into city priorities, and the city leadership goal of regularly speaking to diversity and issues of social equity and the efforts that we're putting in there. And then the Human Rights Commission work plan that includes responding to and and advocate on community issues around homelessness, which Tony referred to, youth issues in our community, and respond and advocate for removal of impediments to immigrant and integration within the Eugene community. And lastly, responding to and addressing the issue of systemic and individual racism. And so there's a great deal of overlap and an opportunity to make sure that the two groups are connecting on a regular basis and informing and guiding each other's work. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak a little bit about that.
Turn it back for questions. Yeah.
I'll start out by just saying thank you and appreciate the good work that you've been doing here. And looking forward to the International Human Rights Day, which is just around the corner. And my only suggestion about that is I think it's given the concern in the community right now about inequities and things of that sort that are very much part of our everyday life right now. You have a key moment to sort of let people know about the Human Rights Commission, and you have a key moment to invite the broader community to participate in the Human Rights Day because of that broad concern about the community. So I'm just hoping that you'll take advantage of that and use free media and other ways to not just invite our friends, but broadly invite people throughout the community to participate in the Human Rights Day. And the other thing that I had wanted to comment on, I really appreciate the focus on homelessness here and for the unhoused, as I like to call it now. I just want to call your attention, and I think you may know that there, and Councilor Ortiz can talk about this more, but there is a Human Services Commission Summit, and I think there's a lot of pieces where people are going to be talking about the same thing, and they just all need to be, we kind of need to consciously tie those efforts together, I think. And right now, CALC is talking about the safe spaces issues. There, even as you look forward and think about how you're going to talk about this through the year, I think it's right, you've got it on your plate right now, because I think we're going to, as we try to evolve out of this, the Occupy Eugene camping into what, if you will, or is going to be, I think one of the things that really surfaced out of the whole discussion is the need for some people to find a place to be during the day that's safe and okay for them to be. So I think that issue is just front and center for us right now. And I know you have to kind of move through your meeting process, but I just would encourage you to the best that you can to help us be engaged in that discussion in a good way that can move us forward. I also think that your emphasis on the youth issue, as you know, there's a pretty large youth component in what's going on too. So that's another opportunity that's right out there at this moment that connects with the other issues. So, and I'll finish up by saying, I think the hate and bias thing is pretty much out there right now too. So, especially against people who are experiencing poverty and homelessness. So I think you have a moment of opportunity around that too. So thank you. Andrea.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you guys for coming. It's good to see you all again at the table. I have a couple questions and then a couple comments. So this Eugene Disability Advisory Committee that you're going to put together, is it going to be housed within the Human Rights Center, or is it going to be a standalone committee? Is kind of what my question is.
It'll be a department advisory committee to central services, so we'll provide staff support, but it will advise central services.
And so how will you go about getting people to join, to the applicants, and are you looking for a profile of people?
So we're working with this came out of recommendations from the Accessibility Committee members, and so they will help transition to what that looks like. So we're in the process of doing that. We just hired the Equity and Accessibility Analyst, and so we're working through figuring out that transition, and hopefully it will be online at the first of the year.
Oh, that's great. So I'm excited to hear about the Hate Crimes Conference. I had this vision that we could get Morris Dees to come speak to us, because he's such a great speaker. He's very passionate, and I don't know if he's going to be coming to the Northwest anytime soon, but boy, that'd be a feather in our bonnet when you talk about somebody who's the man. I'm excited to hear about the youth committee that is in the recommendations to create. I think that'd be a really good hook, and I would hope that we look for kids who are not
aren't the usual suspects, let me put it that way. Kids that can, it could be twofold. There could be people with different types of abilities on this, and I think that would really serve the committee and the community and themselves well to have different experiences. So I hope you look into that. And the other thing I wanted to kind of make a comment about was, the Human Services is having their summit, but I'm actually hoping that us as a council will look at this at our goal-setting session, because I really think that this is something we need to put our arms around, not necessarily human rights, but the whole social service spectrum to begin with. And really, as we go into the next year's budget cycle, I'm really concerned about everything, but I think we need to have a clear direction of where we're going as a city as far as human rights and human services go. And so I'm kind of giving you guys, I've been asking, I talked to the mayor about it, I asked John, city manager, and I really kind of hope that can be a part of what we meet a day and a half over, because I think these 90-minute meetings just doesn't give us an opportunity to really discuss, where we want this to see the city to go. So I hope that works. And I think that's all I have to say.
Pat?
I didn't want to jump in front of you, but go ahead and let Chris talk.
Thanks. All I wanted to do was just really thank you for all the work that you've done. And something that I'm particularly pleased with is how you have taken your work and not let it operate in a vacuum, which I think is critically important. You see the connections between the work you do and other areas, because they are very much connected. It's a whole series of things that are interrelated. And I think the fact that you have liaisons to other committees, you recognize the work they're doing and how that work relates to what you're doing, I think really creates a much stronger network where people can realize, perhaps to some degree, that by focusing in certain areas, you can actually benefit a number of different areas. And I think you're getting that, and I'm particularly pleased with the fact that you do that, because I can see the work you're doing connecting to the work Human Services Commission's doing, to the work that other groups are doing. And if we all operated separately, we wouldn't nearly get as much traction as when we begin to see how those connections are and we have all four wheels on the car spinning in the same direction. That is what I really appreciate a lot, is the fact that you've seen it, you've acknowledged it, it's incorporated into your plan, and you want to work on it from that standpoint. And that, I think, will be what leads us to getting some real successful things done. So I appreciate that, and I really look forward to the ways in which you can make those networks and collaborations work even more effectively.
Pat and Ellen.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to point out something that Tony had mentioned and Ken touched on a little bit, and how we can do exactly what you're saying, Chris, and that's wrap everything in so we can coordinate our efforts with the efforts of other commissions, other committees. And it really is the third leg of the triple bottom line, which is the social equity portion. And Tony touched on that several times, that one of the main functions of the Human Rights Commission is to look at the social equity element of the triple bottom line and make sure that it's not in balance, make sure that it gets at least the same recognition as the economy and the environment. And one thing that we talked about a little bit last night, but maybe going forward, is that as commissions meet, perhaps they can have a position on their agenda, other boards and commissions, that is social equity, and that would wrap any human rights issues into it without making the human rights a separate thing beyond what is a normal city work item on the work agenda. So I think exactly what you say, Chris, is just coordinating our efforts, making sure that we're not doing something beyond the scope of what has been prescribed to the entire organization and the council's goals.
Alan?
Yeah, good work plan. When you came here with the listening sessions, this is exactly what I wanted to see, which was how does this get put into action in the work plan. It seems like the listening session learnings really did help develop this, and I could see several elements of it. But what was your guys' thoughts of how the listening sessions impacted your work plan, and what kind of objectives were there because of what you did in that process? Because that was a lot of effort and time.
Well, we had the university organization, forgive me, I don't remember.
Community planning workshop.
Yeah, they filtered a lot of the listening session stuff through and presented us with the most common trends, so we don't have to listen to everybody, which is good. And so going through that and seeing the highlights of what people wanted, and then we had the think tank that really kind of hashed out main topics and stuff that helped us too. Both Ken and I were part of it from the beginning all the way through.
Right.
And so I think for me, a lot of the trends just kind of tended to come with it by being part of the listening sessions, hearing the stories, and then in turn seeing them on paper. Made it really easy to say, okay, we can really do something big around homelessness, for example. You know, there's an opportunity here if we don't have all these other groups and things like that we can really do something big, you know, as well as with the other groups, you know, that kind of gives us a little more backbone for what we're doing. So,
Yeah, I would, I'm in consensus with what Tony said. I think what we really tried to do was to listen to as wide a range of people from the community as we possibly could. And when we did the online surveys, and we did focus groups, and we tabled at Bethel and you know, various events and things like that, and we received emails, and you know, that's how we got to over 600 people providing us with input, plus the city council, plus city staff, plus, and we really tried to look at the range of things. And of course, then, you know, I'm a sociologist, so I know that if you gather a lot of data, you need to know ahead of time what you're going to do with it, or else it just sits there. So we were very careful to make sure we involved a group from the university that could winnow through it and identify the major themes, even though intuitively I think we knew what they were just from listening. And that was really, really helpful. And then the question came to be, well, you know, what are we going to do with the kinds of things we're hearing expressed? How are we going to organize ourselves differently to make sure that we're more effective in responding to community concerns and the interests and concerns of the city council and the staff of the city? So part of the challenge we had was more of an organizational kind of a thing. And what we decided last night as a commission was that we're going to actually pretty radically change the way in which we conduct our meetings. And we will have every other month a full business meeting similar to the meetings that we have had. And on the alternative months, we will have a briefer business meeting, but the remainder of those meetings will be devoted to the work groups meeting and bringing in folks who can assist the work groups, whether it's city staff people or community group members or individuals who may have some special expertise or something to contribute to the tasks under those work groups. So we're trying to make things you know, more nimble, I guess is the term that's been used, but more responsive to the community. So when people say, well, what do you do? We actually have things going on that we're doing that they're pretty easy to point to. And again, it's all rooted in what we heard and not what we sort of dreamt up as intellectuals or something like that. We really are trying to be responsive to what seem to be the major issues in the community. So that would be my answer.
From a staff perspective, we also did individual interviews with each commissioner and past commissioners, and through those listenings, we were able to really clearly identify what they were struggling with in terms of capacity issues or kind of being stretched. And so when we were listening to the community, we heard really heartbreaking stories. So we got the reality of what the impacts are. So it wasn't just people saying you should do this. We heard how it was really impacting their lives. And I think that from a project team perspective, that really had an impact on the staff that worked on the team. It had an impact on the commissioners, because then we had real ideas of the connection of not just homelessness, but the impacts and some of the struggles. And it's so big, and so then the interconnectedness, so we're looking at the resource and capacity, and we had to think about who else is doing this, and so how do we be more intentional about connecting things, and how do we focus and use our resources really wisely. And so I think the listening helped us do all of that. And I think the work plan and the way the commission is really thinking about how to achieve and be accountable to the work plan is, in my estimation, really helpful for them. They really feel this is doable and manageable, and it's about making those connections, and not in a way that's stretching them so thin that they're not able to do it. So I think the listening was a way of really grounding us in the real experiences, we didn't just ask people what their issues were, we asked them what their possible solutions were. So what were their best outcomes? What did they want us to focus on? So I think we were really intentional about the questions that we were asking. And so we really listened to not only what the issues were, but what their possible solution or what they thought would be relevant for us to focus on. And then we took that information and worked with past commissioners, past staff, our think tank to really kind of wrestle with some of those harder questions. And so we really tried to be intentional and mindful about it.
Yeah, I like the idea of every other meeting being about the 4 groups that you have, and those 4 groups, I think they're the right ones: the youth, homelessness, immigration, and hate and racism. I'll agree with the mayor that I think homelessness is going to be a huge issue, and it should be a big focus of the HRC, and my intention is to help the Occupy Eugene folks have that as a focus as well, and all those synergies working together. If we got the council and HRC and the Occupy Eugene and the rest of the community working on that issue, maybe we can make some headway on it. So I'm glad you're focusing on that one in particular. I think the liaisons that you have to the different other commissions is really good. I like the interconnectedness because everything is connected, and having those liaisons, I think, works to inform each of the different processes that are going on so they don't just stand alone little silos. And then finally, the Departmental Advisory Committee is one of the big changes, and I'm kind of wondering how that's going to be the accessibility committee it used to have. How's that going to interact with HRC? How's that? I know this hasn't occurred yet, so you don't know exactly what's the thought about how that's going to work.
We'll actually have a member, at least one member that's shared. So Andrew is actually the HRC member who's volunteered to help be on that. Tony was the chair of the Accessibility Committee, and so she'll also be helping with the transition. So the idea is that all the members who are on the Accessibility Committee will be like no one's going to lose a seat, and that there will be an intentional kind of connection and ongoing presence. That is my understanding.
Christy, from your perspective, how do you think that's going to change what you guys do?
In terms of making decisions?
Yeah, and how it impacts accessibility in particular, and other things that that Department Advisory Committee will do.
Well, I think it's actually going to be really helpful in terms of being much more informed about our decision-making and things that we're doing and being more intentional and proactive about. So I think we've had some pretty close working relationships with different folks in the community who have helped us a great deal. And so, as we kind of move through exactly how we will work together, I think I'll have a much better sense of the long-term implications. But I think the short-term is there's a lot of opportunity to make major improvements about decisions that we're making, especially around facility management. I think that will be a key area. So.
Okay.
And I would just like to add that because the Accessibility Committee, the time that they can meet, they're to be able to work around everybody's schedule on transportation is during the day, and so HRC members often cannot be on that committee, that we always had a quorum issue, and so we could never really do any kind of voting or processing. We did more advisory to the city staff than anything anyway, so it seems to make a lot of sense that the roles will probably stay the same. It's just not going to have any kind of voting that would affect commission work.
Much more integrated.
Yeah.
And it has an expanded role to deal with departmental issues as well. Finally, I too was looking forward to International Human Rights Day. Unfortunately, that falls on my wedding anniversary, and while I have human rights as a real high priority,
You could come celebrate.
I really love my wife and I like being married, so you all have to.
We can have a cake.
Right. I'll check with Susie. I'll call you if she says yes.
So I have Betty, and then Mike, and then George.
Thank you. My question is, when you talk about homelessness, do you think about preventing homelessness? I think, and I wonder if you've talked to EWEB or if you're collaborating with them. One of the big ways that people become homeless is a huge utility bill which they can't pay. and they already can't pay it, then they're disconnected, and then if they want to get reconnected, they have to pay a fee to get reconnected and pay the back bill. And it's a way to, especially with utility costs going up and up and up, it's a big contributor to losing one's home. And are you doing anything with, are you talking to eWeb about that?
We just created our task team assignments at last night's meeting, and so those task teams will then look at all the issues and different things going on in the community and stuff, and hopefully have an idea of how to combat that. I don't think eWeb or electric bills, water bills and stuff has been a topic, but that's something I can definitely make sure who's ever on that task team to know that is something maybe we should look at and maybe pursue further, just if it's not on their forefront of their mind, it can be.
Well, it's something you might neglect if you're trying to get food, and then you're in a bad position. And I think I'm worried because I just heard when they get the smart meters installed, they can disconnect without even talking to the people, just do it without their knowing it, and suddenly you're without power. So I wonder, and anyway, I think that's a big problem for lots of people. And I had another question, which I've talked, well, actually, people who used to be on the Human Rights Commission a long time ago have talked to me from time to time and said that they felt the Commission didn't care anything about human rights for people who were not part of a protected class. Yeah. For example, someone who's sitting on a bench downtown who doesn't fit any of the classes that you're concerned about. Do you have any response to that?
So I'll just respond real quickly in that in the listening circle, we intentionally went out to listen to everybody. We didn't narrow it by the code. We didn't narrow it by protected classes. We listened to people who thought we should not exist at all, that the Commission had no business even being in existence. So I think that in terms of our office, when people come in and have concerns, we listen and we try to help everyone, regardless of whether or not they have a protected class. So the code does prescribe what's in the rounds of the city in terms of what we can do, but we try to help everybody and at least connect them to someone else who can help them. So that's been my experience, that we haven't turned anybody away.
I would also add that, to my knowledge, youth is not a protected class, and we are focusing very much on what's happening with young people in this community.
That's good. I'm just thinking of somebody who isn't in any class, youth or anything else, just a person. And I remember one person who was on the Commission probably 16 or 20 years ago, before I was more than 16, who talked to me about it, and that may have changed since then. But she left the Commission because she felt they weren't interested in just people. And I'm glad to hear that's not true. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to congratulate all of you on a fine work plan. Having served on the Commission for a few years myself, I remember the process of creating the work plan, and I remember in previous years, some years ago, mind you, but I remember how challenging that was to get everybody to get that process together, and I really admire how much work that you did in terms of homework to make sure that you were creating a plan that was comprehensive, and I appreciate that. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind, though, drilling down a little bit for me on 3.3. Can you help me understand what that work looks like on the ground a little bit more, specifically when you say removal of impediments? I just want to understand it a little better.
Well, yeah, I mean, part of what we're interested in doing is working with groups in the community that have direct experience with immigrants and who are very much aware, and this would be groups like Amigos Multicultural Services Center, Central Latino, CAUSA, the statewide organization, has a representative here in the city. And this Lane County Network for Immigrant Integration is actually about a year old, and it draws from Springfield as well as Eugene. It includes the school systems, it includes the city government offices, as well as nonprofit groups and social justice groups and the League of Women Voters and so forth, all of whom are very interested in, how do we make immigrants feel welcome, safe, secure, and included in what we do in our broader Eugene Springfield community. So while I can't speak for what that particular subgroup will decide to focus upon, I think those are the kinds of things that we had in mind. And obviously, there are groups already out there doing the work, and that's the case with I think, all the work plan groups. And one of the first things that I would hope the work plans would do is establish relationships with groups that are already working on these things to find out what's going on. Part of what we may be able to do is just simply lend a hand to things that are already in motion. But I don't know if that answers your question, but I think we're really concerned with, how are people being treated? And it's not necessarily just simply racial discrimination and things like that. It's whether people feel that they're welcome and included in what's going on in the community. In the school system, for example, there's a lot of issues around, how students feel they're being treated, and that has a great deal to do with whether they stay in school. You all passed unanimously support of the DREAM Act. Unfortunately, that has not yet passed Congress, and so there's a whole issue on the part of kids is, if I stay in school, how am I going to afford to go to college? Where am I going to get a job? I can't even get a driver's license, and so forth. And so I think those are some of the kinds of issues that we were hoping that this immigrant integration work group might help to weigh in on and work with other groups in the community.
Okay. Thanks.
George Brown?
Thank you. Well, thanks. This looks like a really good work plan. I think it's important that you included a special focus on homelessness. It's just such an enormous problem, and it's getting worse through time, not better at all. And we seem to have fewer and fewer resources to deal with it in any I won't say in any meaningful way, because we are addressing it and we are doing affordable housing, but it's like the little boy trying to plug the dike with his thumb. It just increases, and there's so many people that are on the edge and at risk right now, and so I think it's good to have as many eyes possible looking at that problem, and I'm happy that you are going to make a special focus there. And I also really think your outreach plan is very important too, and I know it's early days yet, and the committees are just meeting and working on specifically what you're going to do, but I'm real interested to know if you have any preliminary plans, at least for outreach to the schools. I think that's super important, and I think that should be a main goal for you, because that's where all the negative attitudes happen during those early childhood years. That's where the future racists and the future bigots and the future misogynists and the future civil rights and human rights violators, that's where they learn their skills, is when they're kids, and fortunately most people don't turn out that way, but anything you could do in that respect to actively engaging kids in small classroom size, rather than, go to the auditorium for the obligatory human rights lecture, that won't work. I think it's got to be more,
It's interesting that you mention that, because we have a keynote speaker coming in for the December 6th event, Ajama Baraka, who recently stepped down as the director of the U.S. Human Rights Network for about 8 years. He actually used to be a middle school teacher at one point, but he has a whole history of some 30 years of community organizing and activism and so forth. He's been recognized by the United Nations as a world human rights defender and so forth. He's agreed to come here for 3 days. And one of the priorities that we placed on his visit here, besides speaking as the keynoter at the U.S. Human Rights Network, is that he spend 2 days, 2 mornings, about 4.5 hours each time, in local schools. So he'll be going to Willamette, and he'll be going to North. He'll also be, in a separate event, he'll be meeting with young people who are active in Juventud Faceta, which is an immigrant rights group locally, and Juventud Faceta will be hosting youth from the ACLU new youth group, as well as the NAACP youth group. And I've sort of joked and said we were going to shut all you youth in the room and close the door and lock it with a jamu, and you could talk with them about whatever you want. But we're very conscious of the need, and we're going to do the same thing with Eric Tars when he comes, to make sure that the kids in the schools have somebody who can come in and talk about homelessness from his perspective and from his experiences. 'Cause it really is important that folks like myself be replaced by people coming up to do this kind of work. So yes, we definitely think about this.
No, good, thanks. Yeah, I'd like to, I'm going to follow that because I have a kid in elementary school, and it's just super important. They're like sponges right then, and that's where they pick up all the good things, and that's where they pick up all the bad things too. So I'll be following your work. Thanks very much.
We're just about out of time, and we have another important topic today. Andrew and Alan,
I can ask a question later. It's just about the code changes. When will we be expecting that?
Monday.
Alan, you make your 3 minutes go into 15.
I do.
You're the master. You're the master.
I just want a real quick comment. Something that Betty said. I wanted to clarify something about the smart meters. And I worked at a public utility here locally for over 20 years, and I know there's very, very strict laws about how and when you can and whose power you can shut off for non-payment. And there's a very lengthy process about notice and working with people, and then it very, very actually rarely happens. While the process might be easier with a smart meter, the physical disconnection might be, but the process I doubt is going to change at all. So I don't think smart meters are going to have any impact at all on shutoffs. It'll stay almost exactly the same.
we'll look forward to further conversations, because I think there's a lot coming our way from a lot of places.
I think we have a motion.
Yeah, we need a vote.
Thank you. I move to approve the Human Rights Commission FY 12-13 work plan.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please indicate.
She worked on it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Had to twist Pat's arm, but...
Yeah, it's city.
Thanks, Ken. Look forward to chapter 2.
So our second topic today is Bascom Village, an affordable housing project. People are getting their way to the table here. Okay, I think we're about ready. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. In the interest of time, I'll just turn it over to Stephanie to lead us in the conversation.
Okay. We got the lights.
Thank you all very much, by the way.
Good afternoon, mayors and councilors. As you know, the city has been actively promoting affordable housing for many years. Indeed, the council has often had explicit goals related to the development of affordable housing. Staff routinely come to council to approve various actions related to affordable housing through the 5-year consolidated plan, annual allocations of available resources through the action plan, selection of land bank sites, and also selection of specific development proposals. The council is directly advised by the Housing Policy Board for these actions, and a great deal of time is spent with HPB members reviewing and discussing each action before they are presented for council consideration. Today we have a couple of Housing Policy Board members here. Norton Cabell is in the back, John Van Laningham, both longtime members of Housing Policy Board. One of the city's most important affordable housing tools is our land banking program, which is defined as purchasing land for future development. This program has resulted in many high-quality affordable housing developments and has been cited as a national model. Today we're here to discuss the 2011 housing RFP and the recommended proposal for Bascom Village. Given the concerns that have been raised, we wanted to present this to you in a work session format so that you may have an opportunity to discuss the proposal and related policies in more detail, explore options, and ask questions of staff. We're not asking for any action today. Before moving on, I also wanted to recognize members of the proposal development team, which include Terry McDonald, Kristen Carley, and their architect, Sarah Berkson. Which one? Thank you. So I'll start with some information on related housing needs, city goals and policies, and then I'll turn it over to Becky Wheeler, Housing Finance Analyst, who will discuss the Baskin Village proposal, RFP process, and council options. Overall, we know that more than 44% of Eugene households have a housing cost burden. This means they're paying more than 30% of their income for housing and utilities. One only need to look at today's paper to see the demand for existing affordable housing and how that demand outstrips the supply. The paper reported that 2,500 families entered a lottery for 1,000 spots on the Section 8 waiting list. Lastly, we know our poverty rate has continuously increased over the past 40 years. Today, more than 19% of Eugene households live in poverty. In North Eugene, we know that 53% of North Eugene renters and 32% of North Eugene homeowners have a housing cost burden. There are almost 18,000 jobs in North Eugene, and 72% of those jobs pay less than $40,000 per year. Right now, 87% of the people who work in North Eugene don't actually live there. Between 2009 and 2010, there have been more than 238 homeowner notices of foreclosure in North Eugene, 17% of the city total. These households are now renters. The city's work is guided by the Eugene-Springfield Consolidated Plan. There are 5 goals that relate to affordable housing. One of them is increase the supply of affordable housing. We have a goal of supporting the development of 100 units annually. We've had this goal for many, many years. However, our ability to reach this goal has decreased over time as the available resources increase and the cost of projects increase. The city's work related to affordable housing is guided in part by the housing dispersal policy. The city's housing dispersal policy is aspirational and applies specifically to the distribution of family affordable housing units throughout the city. It was first adopted in 1968, amended in 1974, and amended again in 1996. The current policy sets 3 aspirational goals: provide more housing choices for low-income families by encouraging the development of affordable housing throughout all parts of the community, avoid concentration of low-income families by discouraging subsidized housing developments with more than 60 family units, and then 3, ensure all neighborhoods have affordable housing for families. The land banking program was created as a way to actually implement the housing dispersal policy. It was adopted at the same time as the housing dispersal policy in 1968, and over time the city has gradually identified funding resources, acquired sites, and started to develop units. There are 7 site selection criteria that we use in selecting sites. I would say that these are not requirements, these are criteria that help us to think through the various options, pros and cons associated with each site. And I would say that the city is often making trade-offs amongst these criteria in the selection of any specific site. Outcomes: 90 units have been acquired, 718 units developed, and 110 units are under development at this point in time. These developments and others are scattered throughout the city of Eugene. This map shows the locations of all existing affordable housing developments. The darker areas are places where there's already a concentration of affordable housing. The pale areas and areas with no color are the places where there's little or no affordable housing. The housing dispersal policy encourages us to place future development in the pale color areas. We've also analyzed a number of affordable housing units by high school enrollment area, and that map is to the left of the presentation of the projector board. This map shows the concentration of low and moderate income people. We know that low-income people live in affordable housing. We also know that low-income people live in market-rate housing throughout the community. As you can see, the areas that are red and orange are the places where there are the highest concentrations. The blue areas are the places where there's less concentration. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Becky Wheeler, who will discuss the remaining parts of our presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm Becky Wheeler, and I'm the project manager for the Affordable Housing Request for Proposals processes. And prior to discussing, thanks, Beth. Prior to discussing the process and the proposal specifics, we're going to take a brief look at the County Farmland Bank site history. The site was purchased in 1997 with Community Development Block Grant and general funds. At that time, based on its medium-density residential designation, staff provided City Council with information that estimated future development of affordable units on the site would provide approximately 115 homes. In 2009, more than 175 neighbors and other interested parties, including the Neighborhood Association, were provided notice of a proposed annexation of the site. In May, City Council unanimously approved annexing the site. A year later, a similar list of neighbors and interested parties received notice of a proposed zone change to medium-density residential. The Eugene hearings official received one piece of written testimony and heard verbal testimony from 2 county farm neighbors at the public hearing. The hearings official approved the zone change to medium-density residential in July. No appeals were received. We'll move on to process now. Housing Policy Board began advising staff of the desired content of the RFP in October of 2010. The board developed scoring criteria by which proposals would be reviewed and solicited input from developers, service providers, and the Cal Young Neighborhood Association prior to the RFP's release in March of 2011. More detail regarding the efforts made to work with stakeholders on this process is included in your AIS as Attachment C. The evaluation committee that was appointed by the Housing Policy Board reviewed and scored the proposals in June. They provided the results of their review to the Housing Policy Board in July, at which time they made a draft recommendation to provide city resources to Bascom Village. Following that meeting, a 30-day public comment period opened, and in September, Housing Policy Board held a public hearing. 15 neighbors and 1 attorney representing a neighbor provided testimony at the hearing. As a result of the concerns heard, Housing Policy Board decided to delay taking action and committed to providing a tour of affordable housing sites and a neighborhood forum in October to address additional questions. Housing Policy Board also extended the public comment period through its second public hearing, which was held November 9th. Housing Policy Board not only received oppositional testimony, but several neighbors and concerned Eugene residents provided written and verbal testimony supporting Bascom Village and the city's efforts to provide additional affordable homes for our community. Proposals were sought for two different portions of the RFP. One, we requested proposals for the acquisition and rehab of existing housing, and secondly, for the development of the city's county farm site. Prior to the release of the RFP, Housing Policy Board drafted 5 criteria by which they were to be scored. The 5 evaluation committee members reviewed and scored the 2 proposals received for the land bank site based on targeted population and services, project concept and design, cost benefit, financial feasibility, and organizational experience and performance. In addition to these criteria, the RFP itself also requested that developers propose a design providing a sensitive transition, i.e. larger setbacks and more mature landscaping, to the nearby homes on the west property line. After the lengthy process described earlier, the Housing Policy Board is recommending to City Council that it approve funding and other city resources for the development of Bascom Village. Bascom Village is a 101-unit townhome-style community consisting of 2 community centers, on-site laundry facilities, and extensive resident services program. The proposal exceeds several minimum land use requirements, such as surpassing open space requirements by code by nearly 20,000 square feet, and in some cases, significantly increasing setbacks along the west property line. St. Vincent de Paul proposes to develop 53 units in Phase 1 by 2014, while the Housing and Community Services Agency of Lane County proposes 48 more units in Phase 2 with a target completion date of 2015. The Housing Policy Board and staff heard concerns from neighbors regarding several issues. Attachment E of your AIS describes in detail responses provided addressing these concerns. At its meeting this past Monday, Housing Policy Board discussed for nearly 2 hours the list of concerns you see here on this slide. Each was thoughtfully vetted, and ultimately, the board determined concerns were satisfactorily addressed, and it voted 7-1, with Councilor Pryor abstaining, to recommend the city proceed with providing resources to Bascom Village. There were 3 themes that rose from the concerns heard by the neighbors: traffic, housing dispersal policy, and schools. With a lot of us concerned about the future of our schools, we provide this slide showing historic enrollment trends for the 3 area schools. This data was provided to the city by 4J. Please also refer to the letter attached to your AIS from 4J Representative Barb Bellamy explaining current school capacity. The board has provided a letter, the Housing Policy Board, that is, has provided a letter to council that will be provided by Beth, I think, following this meeting, urging you to support their recommendation to fund Bascom Village. At this time, council has several options. You could approve Bascom Village as recommended by the Housing Policy Board. You could approve Bascom Village with minor modifications. You could direct staff to issue a new RFP with modified requirements and or scoring criteria, or you could explore selling the land bank site. At this time, City Council is scheduled to take action on November 28th. With that, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to present this information. And as you know, Councilor Pryor serves on the Housing Policy Board, so I'd like to end my presentation and ask if he would like to add anything and start the council's discussion.
I think the only thing I would add just very quickly is I think the Housing Policy Board did the job that they're asked to do, which was to review this particular project, see if it conforms to what their interpretation is of the housing policy, and then forward a recommendation to this body. And the way it's organized in terms of the issues they addressed, I would like to thank the chair, Norton Cobble, for helping to organize that so that they could be dealt with in that way. And the last thing I would mention is this is the 3rd housing proposal that I've reviewed. The first 2 went relatively easily. They were actually on our consent agenda and were pulled off to be dealt with, but they went through in a relatively straightforward way. And I think the notification procedure that was used in all 3 of those cases was very similar, which is a fairly standard procedure. So it's important that what happens when it does become an issue, when it does become controversial, becomes very much an issue. And when we determined at our first hearing that there was a significant amount of concern in that community about this, to their credit, the Housing Policy Board said, we're going to slow down. We're actually not only going to slow down, we're going to build additional steps into this process in order to make sure that these concerns are heard, not just glossed over or ignored, and accommodated to the degree the Housing Policy Board can, and then kicked to the full City Council for their consideration as well. As was mentioned, there were 2 public hearings, there was a tour, there was a community forum, there was an extension on written testimony. It's what you do when you realize you have an issue that I think really indicates whether you're sincere in wanting to hear what the community has to say, and I think the Housing Policy Board demonstrated that sincerity. The Housing Policy Board is forwarding a recommendation to approve the project after considering not only the testimony and the information that came through in the hearing, but also their review of the conditions and the factors, both in the law and also what they heard as well. They do that with the full knowledge that there are policy questions larger than their mandate that may also need to be considered. As I mentioned at the meeting, we are in the process of doing an Envision Eugene, which involves discussions of density, urban growth boundaries, the mix between multifamily and single family. While this specific project may not affect that particular policy in a great way one way or the other because it's a single project, it does have a bearing. It's the interconnectedness we were talking about before. Things are connected. And so I think the Housing Policy Board did its job. It made a recommendation, and it made the recommendation that it felt comfortable making, but they do it with the knowledge that this is the forum where ultimately the policy questions have to be talked about as they apply. So I just wanted to say that as a preface to thank the members of the Housing Policy Board for the work that they did. I think they did a good job, and those that are here deserve credit for that.
I too would like to thank the Housing Policy Board, and I would just add to your comments, Chris, that I think historically we have seen a need for affordable housing in our community and set up high goals to try to get to that. And in our Envision Eugene discussions, affordable housing has remained a priority through that discussion too. So that really hasn't changed, and in our current recessionary times, in fact, it's become even more of an issue for how we're going to do our best to ensure housing is available to people in our community. Mike, you're up first.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll probably need a second round as well. I wanted to say first that I agree with the idea that because we obviously have a shortage of affordable housing, we ought to be attacking this problem on multiple fronts. I'd like to see us do a more effective job with Envision Eugene in creating affordable, in addressing the market for affordable land in a way that we create affordable housing for all rather than subsidized housing for a few. I'd like to see us do a better job of creating a broader section of affordable housing for everyone, and I think a part of that is how we address the availability of land. Could you put up the slide for the housing RFP process for me, please?
Let's see if I can.
It was in the middle there, I think.
Can I go back somehow to previous? You might have to.
And if we could stop the time here, well.
This one?
There we go,
Okay.
right there. That's the, I'm sorry I didn't prepare to come in with a map, but that one looks pretty good so that everybody gets a chance to see the site. What you see there where the numbers are is the chunk of property right there. What you can't see is the wider view here, and I have a challenge with this because policy number 2, there's a goal for that policy, and then there's the specific language for the policy. The goal for policy 2 of the housing dispersal policy is to discourage the creation of large areas characterized by low-income families, and I would suggest that's exactly what we're doing here in this place. If you look to the south of this, what starts at the very bottom of that picture and then moves south is a low-income housing area there, and I don't know the number of units off the top of my head.
38.
38 in the Matt Drive area right there. We're looking at another one of 101, which violates our kind of guideline for having none of them larger than 60 unless there's a pretty good reason to do so. The townhomes that you can see right there are not low-income townhomes, but as you can see, none of them have yards at all, and they're clustered in so closely that you can nearly open your window and spit and hit your neighbor's house. What's proposed for that?
Nice visual.
What's proposed for the property to the north of that, immediately adjacent, is another development of multi-unit housing with 160 units. So I believe, just looking at the map, it's very easy to see that what we are doing is creating a very large pocket of low-income housing right at the community's outer edge and right at the edge of the city limits. And I think it doesn't conform. It's not consistent with policy. I think there's a couple of negative effects, and I'll probably, like I said, need a second round because I'm running out of time here. But the first one is, and I'll start it. All of the developments we're talking about on that picture are going to dump out onto County Farm Road, which is what runs north and south right there. It's an undeveloped road that has gravel on the sides. And I'm going to run out of time, so I'll get back to that in my next round.
All right, Pat, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not going to talk about the specific issues, just the process that got us to this point, and kind of follow on what Councillor Pryor has already outlined. I've had a chance to sit in on the public forums. I was there on November 9th, which was very interesting, when a very large group of people, many of whom are sitting in the audience today, presented testimony. I'm not going to respond to the testimony. All of the concerns that put forward are legitimate. Significantly, the Housing Policy Board, as of the meeting this week, the Housing Policy Board on November 14th, and what they have done, I'll reiterate what Councillor Price said, is they've acknowledged that this City Council has a responsibility of taking their recommendation and doing one of four different things with it. We have to look at this very deliberatively and look at the 6 issues or the 6 areas of concern that the people living in the immediate vicinity have. All very legitimate concerns. Transportation, schools, public access to services, etc. We have to look at all of those, and there'll be arguments on both sides, and there'll be mitigation presented on as far as addressing the issues that the folks living there have. We have to look at this very deliberatively and understand that the overarching thing is that we do have a dearth of affordable housing in Eugene, whether it's subsidized low-income housing or whether it's private multiple or single-family dwellings. We don't have enough housing in Eugene. Taking it all in context with Envision Eugene, with the pillars and the plans of Envision Eugene, is very important. And while I could address the issues that have been raised, I'm not going to at this point in time. I think we'll have plenty of time to work through that. But bear in mind that you'll hear lots and lots of arguments on both sides, and you'll hear lots and lots of responses and mitigations. And we have a huge responsibility in this, because I think what we do regarding Basking Village is going to set a tone of what we do. Sometime, maybe we'll start looking at South Eugene for affordable housing too.
So I want to thank staff and the Housing Policy Board for all the work that they've done on this project. We do need more affordable housing, as both Mike and Pat have said, and I very much appreciate the affordable housing program that the city has operated over the years and has done a very good job, and especially the work done by Richie Wyman over the many years that he did it. Who's filling his shoes? That you, Stephanie? Good luck. Those are big shoes to fill. And if I look at that map that's behind, that map is, if I got it right, can somebody put that up so people can see it?
Here's another big one.
Is there one on here? Is there a slide of that one?
Yeah.
That's the distribution.
So that's the distribution of the housing units. Yeah, so all those purple dots are the distribution of all the housing units, and that's predominantly because of our housing dispersal policy, and it looks pretty dispersed to me. So I think that's been a good policy since the 60s, and it's served the city well. The question I had was, you said that was an aspirational policy. What does that mean? What's the definition of aspirational?
In 1996, Council decided to make this, to actually separate it from its land use policies and to make it an aspirational policy. So at that point in time, prior to 1996, there was actually a hard limit of no more than 80 family units in any given development. What the changes in 1996 did is said we want to separate this from our land use processes. We want to make the goals aspirational rather than requirements, and also set the number of family units a little bit lower at 60, no more than 60 family units in any particular development.
What's a family unit?
So,
that's not bedrooms.
Yes. Well, in this case, it does get equated to bedrooms, and so legally you can't say a family occupies this unit or not that unit. But so what we do for the purpose of these developments is say that 2 bedrooms or more are family units. That said, data shows that not all of those units are actually occupied by families, and so they're occupied by other household types.
So the policy says try not to go over 60 units.
Right.
And this development has 110 units?
This development has 74 units with 2 or more bedrooms, and then the other units are one-bedroom units. So as it relates to the policy suggests a target of 60 units, and this particular development has 74 units. One thing I do want to mention is that, while this development overall has a larger number of units, the proposal is actually at a density that is less than most of our other sites because this is a larger site. So if you look at recently built developments, most of them have much higher densities, and some of them have slightly higher densities than this particular site.
When we changed the policy from the code to an aspirational policy, and so what was the rationale between the 80 number and the 60 number? And so it used to be no more than 80. This is 74, so it meets the old one. When was that, and what was the rationale for making it 60 and not 80 back then?
My understanding, and I'll also defer, I think there are a couple of people on council who were here at that point in time, is that, so 80 was, don't go above this, ever. And so they said, let's identify 60 as a target, but also recognize that we want to have flexibility. And in the council minutes from that session, when they adopted the policy, they specifically decided not to incorporate language that prohibit or stronger language into the policy. They specifically said, we want to reserve for ourselves the flexibility to balance this policy against other city goals in the future.
So they didn't say make it between 60 and 80, they said 60, but didn't make it a hard and fast rule.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Chris, can you summarize kind of what I wasn't at the Housing Policy Board meeting, so what their rationale for was for the majority that voted 6-1 and you for recommending this?
They felt the issues were sufficiently addressed. The concerns of the community, they felt, were being sufficiently addressed within the policy and within regulation.
Oh, okay. So if I understand this right, we've owned this parcel for 14 years, since 1997, and it's always been designated for and pegged for affordable housing development?
That's correct.
But not number of units or anything like that, just as a land bank for that purpose?
Right. We've never explicitly said this is the number of units will be put on the site, although, as I mentioned before, when it was presented to council in 1997, staff did estimate a number of 115 affordable units.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we've been working on this RFP for over a year?
Yes.
And notwithstanding the general overcrowding of classrooms, which we have debated in this community quite a bit, 4J said that it's not a problem with incorporating these students into these particular schools.
4J gave us an estimate of between, I believe it was 35 and 95 children would come from this development based on LCOG's study of similar developments. And yes, Bellamy gave us information that the capacity at the 3 area schools could accommodate those kids.
Right. So the 3 issues were the housing dispersal policy, 4J, and traffic. Can you give me a sense of what the traffic issues they were talking about?
Sure. Neighbors on Parkview Street, which is just north
solutions would be?
Sure. The Parkview Street, if you look at that site plan behind Mayor Piercy, is just to the north of the site, and neighbors are very concerned about increases in traffic on Parkview and also increases in traffic on County Farm in general, specifically due to the Wildish trucks. Now, we've been working with Public Works staff, and Gary McNeil is also here to answer any questions, if need be, on providing traffic calming along Parkview and also options about providing the sidewalk from the site to the bus stop to the south.
On Country Farm Road?
County Farm Road.
So there's only one way in and out of this thing?
That's correct, and that's due to the classification of County Farm Road.
Which is?
Gary, it's a major collector, am I correct?
Yes.
I would just amend that to say that, as you can see, Matt Drive runs through the middle of the site, and when the area is completely built out, there will be 2 access points in and out of the site. Although right now the parcels to the south, directly to the south, have not yet been developed.
So when they are, the Matt Drive will go through?
Yes,
the street?
correct.
Okay. I think Chris is right. The opponents make some interesting arguments that apply to our upcoming Envision Eugene conversation about housing, single-family housing need, and all the same issues we're dealing with here are going to apply to those UGB expansions for that as well. So it's really interesting to me. Early analysis.
I've got Chris and Andrea in the queue and then Mike for a second round. And the question that I wanted to point out, so we always think of the river as the how we separate north and south, but obviously it goes, what's the road that kind of we think of for where North and South Eugene are as you go across this map?
West 11th, maybe?
No. No, we're still, like I'm on 4th, and we're still in South.
I'd say Beltline.
I don't know, but
That's the most important road, you know.
Duncan City.
Roosevelt.
East side is the river.
So I'm just saying, if you look at where all those purple dots are, where all that housing is that would be included on the south side of the river, I think you see there's a large amount of it on the south side of the river. Chris, you're next.
Yeah, I'll try to go quickly in the interest of time. I think one of the interesting collisions, and I view a lot of this as a collision. It's a collision in values and a collision in interests. And one of them that really kicks it to us is the collision between an issue we've been talking about a lot, which is neighborhood character and livability, versus the other needs with regard to providing housing. As we saw in the paper today, and Stephanie pointed out, there's far more need for housing than there is housing available. And at 100 units a year, we're still not going to address the issue. So it's another one of those things where you need other approaches than just building housing. I agree. But we are having these conversations in Jefferson West Side neighborhood, in South University neighborhood, in West Side neighborhood. The conversation about neighborhood livability is a very big one, and it's a very important one. And I don't want to isolate the discussions of livability here with the other ones that we're having. But I also want to put it into the context of the other conversations that we're having. And so I hear, for example, what Mike is saying with regard to the other developments that have already been built there, and the one that he pointed out specifically, not low-income housing. It's market-rate housing, but it's private, and yeah, it's ugly. And you get ugly stuff like that oftentimes when you don't control what gets built there. And if other private market-rate housing goes in there, it may be just as ugly. And I'm sorry if the builder's here, but it's ugly housing. I won't dispute it. What's being proposed is something that the Housing Policy Board, or at least the city, has some impact on, because it is at a lower density. It does have more space. And that's where you can actually have some influence on what actually gets built there. It doesn't really address the issue about is there really too much multi-family housing being built in that area. And that's a larger conversation. But with regard to this project on its own merits, all by itself, I think it really acknowledges the fact that you could build a lot more there. The zoning allows a lot more there, and the market rate private developer do that, and they may build a lot more of that. And if this site were to be sold to a private developer, they may choose to do that as well. I don't want to predict the future. I don't have a crystal ball that's that bright, but I'm just drawing the fact that this project is representative of a collision we're having between a conversation in the neighborhood about its livability and character, and the larger conversation that we're having about how do you provide housing, particularly if we're talking about mixes, 55-45, 60-40, what is the mix? If you're going to go for a higher mix of multifamily housing for increasing density purposes, it's going to, hopefully it will look more like this than what's already there, if that's where you're going to go. And so this is a very complex subject that we may want to look. We may want to look at what are the mitigating factors to it.
Andrea?
Thank you, Chris. Conversation is really good, and thanks Stephanie for the presentation and the Housing Policy Board for the work that they do. I know it's thankless. So, Chris, I just whenever I hear this phrase, my cackles go up. Neighborhood character and livability means so much different things to different people.
Yeah.
In my neighborhood, in the Train Song neighborhood, that's safety. Forget about the character of the house or how many people are moving. We'd love to have one of Terry McDonald's units in our neighborhood, but because we are over the limit for poverty in our census tract, is what I figured, is why none have ever landed there. Is that correct, Stephanie?
I would say that the city has not pursued developing there
So,
because of the
I think,
concentration.
from what I've seen personally, the ones that I've toured and the ones that I've been at, they're all very well managed, and they tend to add to the neighborhood, not take away. So I'm just glad to have this conversation. It does collide with what we're doing on with our Envision Eugene project, so I'll be interested to continue in this. I did have a question, but I lost it. So I will, that's it, Mayor, thanks.
Before we go to second round, I'll let George Brown go.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I'd just like to go back to the map here that shows the dispersal of the affordable housing units. I think they're dispersed very well. I believe Councilor Farr referred to something like, when will South Eugene have them? And you can see that, I just did a quick count when I heard that, there's 15 in South Eugene, south of 11th Street. My ward just expanded a little bit. Ward 1, there's 17 in Ward 1. There's 8 in Bethel, or 7 in Bethel. I mean, they are scattered around. So I just want to reiterate that for people that are watching. It is a very good dispersal policy, and it is the way that it should be, by the way. I mean, they should not be all grouped in ghettoized form. I'd like to see the social services spread out more around town also. And you can see in that part of the extreme northeast, I think underneath Crescent Avenue, I see one. So I think that area is ripe for a development like this. And I know that St. Vinny's projects are outstanding. They're handsome, they're attractive, they're monitored with live-in staff. They never present any problems. Who are these people? They're the working poor, and mom and dad both work, and they have kids. They're trying their working their tails off, but as we know, the wage structure here is pretty low in town, and the waiting list is enormous. They've been over the statistics, 45% rent burden. I think it's a fantastic project, and I've looked at I do sympathize with the neighbors' concerns. I don't want to give the impression that I'm totally callous about that. But I believe that the staff has addressed those concerns adequately, in my view. So far, unless I hear something compelling between now and the vote, I'm enthusiastic in support of this project. Thank you.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with George that the housing dispersal policy is a good idea for all the reasons and the goals that are stated, and I agree with Chris that what's going on is a kind of a clash of values around the idea of livability. I'm sorry about that, Andrea. That's
off track.
Yeah, but again, the aspirational goal behind the policy, I don't have a problem with the policy. I just don't think we're following it. The goal behind the policy, goal number 2, I read before, if you look at the larger context of the area, is both contrary to that aspirational goal, and it's contrary to what we're trying to do with the process of Envision Eugene with regard to building so much density right at the outer core of our community. There are 2 safety concerns that I have, and one about the schools, and I want to get into some detail on that, but we don't have the time today. The school numbers I would dispute, and my kids go to that school, and I'm pretty familiar with what took place. I can explain why I dispute those numbers, but we probably shouldn't go into that. But I have heard at the table today at least 4 counselors and maybe 5 say that they appreciate the opportunity to hear more, that they look forward to the rest of the discussion. The only thing scheduled from this point forward is for us to make a decision on the 28th. I would like to move that we postpone that decision until the council has a public hearing in order to accommodate people being heard on this at the council level where the decision is to be made, and for us to have a good informed decision. And if I have a second, I'll speak to that for you.
second that.
I'd like us to have a process, and I think the process is important, where my concern with Housing Policy Board is there's kind of this interesting dynamic at work there. They're all doing very good work to try and solve a problem. They are advocates in one sense of the word. Okay. They're advocates in one sense of the word, and they're quasi-judicial in another sense of their work in evaluating these projects. But the reality is, we're the only body that should act in a quasi-judicial fashion to evaluate whether something is a good idea and follows and conforms to policy. So I hope that we can have a chance to hear folks more thoroughly before making that decision.
Move to extend for 10 minutes to provide direction to...
Second.
Aye.
Second.
I have a nod. Does anybody object to the 10 minutes?
I do.
One, okay, I'll do an official vote. Okay, all those in favor of 10 minutes? 6 and 1 in opposition. Passes. Okay, so now we're back to Mike's motion. And did you finish your?
Yes, I did. Thank you,
All
Mayor.
right, so I've got Andrea, Alan, and Chris in the queue.
You guys are getting me off track. So I will speak to the motion because historically, City Manager, can you help me? When we've had a public hearing, is it when we're looking at ordinance change, or do we just have public hearings to have them?
Since I've been here, we've had a little bit of both, and oftentimes it's for a specific ordinance change, but we have had them for both. In this case, we could put the public hearing on November 21st, which is the Monday, prior to the 28th, if you chose to do that.
So, I don't know how I will vote on the request for the public hearing. My challenge is with the fact that if we're going to do a public hearing, I just think that if we're going to look at the dispersals policy, I would definitely want to add some language in there around social service agencies. Thanks for bringing that up, George. I think that what my question was, because really when we look at that map, the housing is dispersed all over the city, but if you were to do a similar map for social service agencies, I could guarantee you that a high percentage of them would be along Highway 99 and in the Whitaker area. And, that's, talk about neighborhood character. That's kind of challenging at times too. When another one moves in, we really don't have any say-so about how it goes because they've bought the property, they've done everything that they're by law required to do. So you really can't change the format. I guess what my question was: are these? There's two different agencies doing this RFP. So is that really one unit, or is that two different projects? I mean, the land allows for it by code as many units as is going in there, I'm assuming, or else they wouldn't be doing that. So I guess that's kind of my, like, it seems to me like there's two different projects going on here, and so, that isn't spoken to in the policy. So can you kind of help me with that?
What I would say is it's presented as one proposal with two phases, and they are distinct financially and in their timing, but they're presented as one proposal. In other parts of Eugene, we do have developments that are right beside one another or fairly close to one another, and so it's not something that's out of our experience in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Chris? I'm sorry, it's Andrea and then Chris. Alan and then Chris. Alan.
Sure. So I just did a real quick count. If you just took First Avenue, it's 32 above, 31 below, but my friend Pat Farr said that's number of developments, not number of units. Can you get us the number of units?
On the school attendance area map, that references units.
That's the, okay, 759,
but it's not
630.
split by the way you were looking at it.
Yeah, right, well, sort of. Okay, that's pretty close to even. Actually, it's more south than north. So on the motion, so is this going to set a precedence that we would then have a public hearing on every affordable housing project that comes up, or just because it's controversial? So it's the squeaky wheel theory. If you get enough people to make it controversial, we get to force the council to have a public hearing. I don't actually have a problem with that. I think that's not actually a bad idea. I just don't want to set a precedence that every single affordable housing project that comes up gets a public hearing, because that's not what we've done in the past. I don't think that's what we need to do in the future. And secondly, the way that you phrased your motion, is it okay that we put it on, if it passes, to put it on the 21st, and then because then, I don't know if there's any problems with delaying the project, because construction projects
Do we have notice?
have issues, but do you know the answer to that, Chris?
I was going to talk about that, or Stephanie can do it.
Okay. So if there is, I wouldn't want to delay the project, because that time equals money a lot in these kind of projects. So, but I don't necessarily have a problem with putting it on the public hearing calendar on the 21st.
I would just say that I think, we're hopeful that we can make a decision one way or another by the end of this calendar year, in part because if we do need to do a new housing RFP, we need to start working on that right away. And the primary issue is the state's funding cycle, and really in order for the developers to prepare their application, they need several months to do that, because it's a very extensive application and that deadline is in the spring. So we're just simply trying not to miss that deadline, which essentially, we lose a year of funding, we lose the ability to develop units, we fall further behind in our goals.
So by that, I mean if this project were to be unapproved or disapproved, then you'd have to start over and probably wouldn't make that cycle.
Depending upon, if you're looking at modifications to the proposal, if there are significant modifications, it probably would require us to do a new RFP because the financing is connected to the design, it's connected to the to various aspects of the project. So if you wanted us to do a new RFP, we definitely would not be able to make that deadline.
Would number of units be a significant change?
Yes, because number of units have a very significant impact on the rents and the financing, and tax credit projects in general don't perform very well if you get below 40 units. And so there are 2 tax credit projects proposed for this development. But any reduction in units really, we would need to give the developers an opportunity to work through their pro formas. It could also change the amount of money that they ask for from the city and actually increase the amount of money that they may need for us to produce fewer units.
I just want to say 2 things. We have about 4 minutes left within this period of time. I've got 4 people in the queue, and I wanted to ask, if you have a hearing, does this qualify as a land use hearing of any kind?
No, this is not a land use hearing where you have the quasi-judicial process, the ex parte communications. This is a funding decision and a property disposal decision.
And so the only other comment I would make for you to consider is, really in one way or the other, it matters not whether you call it a public hearing or you invite people to take advantage of the 3 minutes at the beginning of a council meeting, and where we often have 30, 40 people show up and use their 3 minutes to talk to us. Either you could accomplish it in a regular community forum part of your council meeting or in a dedicated hearing, but it would end up being the same thing. Okay, Chris.
Yeah, just from a guidance to staff standpoint, I don't mind the squeaky wheel standard. I think the squeaky wheel standard can be fine in terms of not establishing precedents, but responding when there is a need. So in this case, I could support a public hearing because it has achieved, to me, a squeaky wheel standard, and that would be okay. But the other point also is the recognition that there is a window, a funding window that's available here. And if you had the public hearing on the schedule that John is talking about, you would still, if possible, need to take action before the end of the year if you want to get in on this funding cycle. I'm not saying that that's a do or die. You could always go to another funding cycle. It creates an inconvenience. It creates another entire year, but that's just something to keep in mind if you go. So I'm willing to support a public hearing simply because we've achieved enough interest that we probably in good faith should have one. But be aware that if you need to tweak the project more than just a little bit, you probably would miss this funding opportunity. It's just an awareness thing. Be aware of what the implications are of each decision that you make.
George?
Thank you. I'm not necessarily opposed to a public hearing, but I mean, it seems like our public forum, just our regular meeting, would serve the same purpose. We've been receiving voluminous email. My guess is that the testimony at the public hearing or forum would not differ from that substantially. I think they'll still go over the opponents, or the people with concerns will still go over the 4 major concern areas that they've listed. So I don't know that in terms of new information if that would even be useful, but it's certainly in a public forum we listen anyway, and hopefully there would be some new evidence to oppose the project or tweak it. But I guess that's okay. My question is, there have been at least one public hearing already, though?
There's been 2.
There have been 2. There have already been 2 public hearings, and I don't know that we need a third one personally. So it seems like if someone still wants to address us as a body, they could just come to the public forum on next Monday night, and it would serve the same purpose. Thank you.
Pat?
Just very briefly, there have been 2 public hearings, but none before the City Council.
Right.
The one on November 9th, Councilor Pryor was there, I was there. I think it would be beneficial for the entire council to hear the things that have been said. So I am in favor of it for that reason. And Northwest Eugene has about 50% more than South Eugene, by the way, if you know that out. So.
Just real quickly there, just on the calendar, the public hearing could be on the 21st. The next public forum is scheduled for the 28th, and we would not move the action item from the 28th unless we were directed, and so there would be the public forum is on the 28th.
So the 21st would work.
Yeah.
So 21st.
The what?
21st is...
The public hearing, but then the public forum would be the same night as the action item. I just want to...
So it would be either.
We couldn't do the public forum on the 21st.
Right.
Right. It would either be a public hearing on the 21st or a public forum on the 21st.
On the night of.
One of those two.
Right.
Just do the public
But
hearing.
who's doing the public hearing, right?
Just do the public.
His motion was to do a public hearing.
On the 21st?
Yeah.
Add it to the list of
All right,
public
Mike?
hearing things.
Yeah, I was just going to respond, and I don't need to.
Ready to... So Mike's motion is in front of you, and it's for the... Do we have a date specific on that?
Public hearing 21st.
21st. All right, all those in favor? 7 in favor and none in opposition, it passes. And anything else? Nope, I think we're done for today. Thank you.
Thank you.